Negative food reactions are at the root cause of many chronic conditions. The question is, how do you identify them?
Introducing the Paramena Bliss Podcast, a show dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of achieving optimal health naturally as you transition into perimenopause and menopause. Get ready to join your host, Dr. Seth Yates, an experienced naturopathic doctor, acupuncturist, and kinesiologist, as he shares his wealth of knowledge acquired from over 40,000 patient visits and 15 years in working with perimenopausal females. Welcome to the Paramena Bliss Podcast.
Hey, this is Doc Yates of the Paramena Bliss Podcast, brought to you by PerimentalBliss.com. And today I want to discuss a way that you can test for food sensitivities and negative food reactions with just the use of your smartwatch. That's right, just the use of your smartwatch. And I'll describe at the end that, yes, this is not the only way to do it. And there's usually when it comes to food sensitivities, you have to use a few different ways because there's no way that's perfect. But this is something that can help give some feedback to determine if you're on the right track. So this is a test. This is a really old, man, I guess at this point it's probably 90 years old since it was developed by a Dr. Coca. It's called the Coca Pulse Test. And he was an immunologist. And what he found was that there was a lot of people whose health issues were related to problems with food that they were eating. The question was, how did you determine what were the problem foods? Because sometimes the patient history wasn't working. Sometimes eliminations diets weren't working. So he was able to determine something called the pulse test. So it's now called the Coca Pulse Test. And here's how it works. When you eat a food that is a food that would give you a bad reaction, so it could be a food sensitivity, it could be a food allergy, it could just be some sort of negative food reaction. It's hard to say which antibody it's always affecting. So this one doesn't depend on the antibody, it depends on your body's response because you're measuring the pulse. So you're eating a food and you're checking your pulse after to see if it increases, and this is where your smartwatch can be so helpful because it's constantly monitoring your pulse so you can see if there's a change. So now you can use your smartwatch to see if you're getting a negative food reaction. So let me describe how you do the test. First of all, you need to make sure it's at least 2 hours since you've eaten anything. Before you do the test, you want to rinse your mouth out and you need to sit down and relax because you need to be relaxing because the first thing you're going to do is get your resting heart rate in beats per minute. So you sit down, make sure you're just chilled right out, and then look at your smartwatch after you've been sitting there for a while and determine what is your heart rate while you're at rest. Then you're going to take a suspect food. You take this food, and we're going to do everything in terms of 1 minute to keep it simple. So you take your heart rate for 1 minute, check it out. Then you take a suspect food and you chew it for 1 minute without swallowing it, just chewing it for 1 minute. After, you're going to take your heart rate again for a minute while still chewing that food, or holding the food in your mouth at that point, I should say. And the question is, did that food cause a reaction where your heart rate went up at least 6 beats per minute? At least 6 beats per minute. So, you test for a minute, you chew for a minute, you test for another minute, and you're looking for an increase in at least 6 beats per minute. If it didn't go up, the food's taken out, you rinse your mouth out, and then you repeat with another suspect food. If it did go up, you still rinse your mouth out, but then you have to relax and wait until your heart rate comes back down to the resting heart rate before you repeat with another food. So whatever the case, you rinse your mouth out and you make sure your heart rate's back down to its resting heart rate that you determined before the test. And then you repeat with another food and you keep going through foods. You can do multiple foods at a time, which is kind of nice compared to other styles of testing. Now, there's factors that can affect this. And this is why some people will rail on this test saying, well, it's not accurate enough. And the thing is that there's no test. There is no test for food reactions or food sensitivities outside of, someone having such a full-on allergic reaction, that their lips and throat is closing, that there's no other perfect gold standard. But this is something they can use to help. So 1, if you're under a lot of stress and your heart rate is elevated, it's not a good time to do the test. 2, don't do the test after you're having a bunch of stimulants like caffeine, or say you just had like a pre-workout or something like that. It's because you need your heart rate to be at its relaxed state. And then lastly, medications. If you're on any medications that have a sedative effect, a lot of cold medications, allergy medications, on any medications for heart rate or blood pressure, it's probably going to interfere with the test, making this not too accurate. Now, as I mentioned before, use this test to help determine if you're getting any reactions, but just because a food shows up as that it's not an issue doesn't guarantee that it's not an issue, unfortunately. Like I said, there's no 100% test. You can do blood tests for IgG antibodies. You can do blood tests for IgE antibodies. You can do scratch tests for allergies. You can do an elimination diet. Every one of these has pros and cons. So my suggestion would be, when you can, use them together. Use them together to try and get information to determine what foods can be problematic for you. And again, it has to be worth it for you. Like if you don't really have any health issues at all, it's harder to determine what test is going to be the best one to do. But if you've got a lot of serious health issues, say you have a really bad case of asthma or bad cases of allergies or a strong inflammatory or autoimmune case, using a mixture of all these tests is definitely worth it, because you're going to need feedback. Because you have to, in those situations, determine what are the problematic foods. And while at the same time, you don't want to have to live on a diet that's so restrictive that you can't add anything back into it. So you want to be able to use these tests to help give you some answers without just having to live off of spinach for the rest of your life, which is not going to work well for you. Because I've had a lot of clients whose diet literally gets down to where they're only doing 4 foods. They don't know what to add. They feel okay on 3 to 4 foods, and that's it. And that makes their lives very difficult. So use this information to help figure things out while you're doing the other treatment process. The other thing too to remember is that just identifying the foods is only step 1 of getting better. So identifying and removing the foods is step 1. You still then have to do things to improve your digestion, heal your intestinal tract, balance your immune system, and all of those things along with it. But it's a lot easier to get better responses when you've eliminated the most common problematic foods. So I hope that was helpful. I hope if you got a smartwatch and you're curious, try doing the Coca Pulse test on yourself. You can go back and listen to this podcast for the instructions again. I'll just give them to you one more time. Relax, rinse out your mouth, get a baseline heart rate for 1 minute, chew a food for 1 minute, hold it in your mouth while doing the next test for your heart rate again for 1 minute, and see if it goes up by 6 beats per minute. Rinse, relax, and repeat for the next food. I hope this was helpful. This is Doc Yates signing off.
Thank you for tuning in to the Paramena Bliss podcast. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and visit paramenobliss.com for more valuable information on how you can thrive during your transition through perimenopause. Join our community of like-minded women who are dedicated to achieving optimal health naturally, and stay up to date with the latest tips, tricks, and advice from Dr. Seth Yates. And we'll catch you on the next episode of the Paramena Bliss podcast.